Hello, I'm Casey Basis, and if no one's titled a negative review of this film Wish I Wasn't Here, I'd be very surprised. Okay, so this film was by Zach Braff, who's best known with Garden State, I guess. The main talk behind his new movie, Wish I Was Here, is mostly behind the Kickstarter campaign that started back in April last year. There was a lot of splash surrounding the way that this movie was financed. It picked up steam almost immediately following the huge blast of Veronica Mars on Kickstarter that Zach Braff did his appeal to the public requesting funding so that he would be able to have final cut on the movie. And finally getting to see this film, I had the chance to watch it this weekend because it released in New York. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to attend one of the late night ones where Zach Braff actually spoken about it, but having seen it, I feel like this movie paled a lot coming out for me after Boyhood, because you can look at it thematically and see there are some similarities because both of them are kind of about the process of growing up. It's another one of the many, many films that's coming out as of late where you see the theme of maturing applied to somebody who's in their mid-30s or 40s. So it's about learning responsibility and being able to marry just your dreams with what the world actually is and what your responsibilities are and what you have to do. It's about growing up. And in the case of Boyhood, where it had a lot of reasons behind its narrative decisions, why it had the feel that it had to have, it's unfair to be comparing these two movies, but at the same time, there was nothing I could do to avoid comparing them because the theme did feel very similar. The tone felt very similar, that they're both tackling these very serious issues, and having seen them so close to each other, this movie really suffered from that for me. In a way, I also feel like the editing, while not terrible, there were some scenes, again, that could be trimmed. That one of the framing devices that's very prevalent in this movie is that you see the spaceman as a motif that the main character, that the movie starts off with showing Zach Braff's character in a spacesuit pretending that he's a hero, explaining what his general thoughts on life were in childhood, and you see the spaceman return throughout the movie. And you see the brother dress up as an astronaut, and I'm sure there's a good reason for that, in that you're showing something that most people thought of when they were children. I mean, who didn't dream of being an astronaut at some point? But at the same time, it didn't mesh well with the rest of the tone of the movie because you had just these very limited number of scenes where you have the fantasy element, and it does almost bookend the movie, but it only shows up for very short bursts 3 or 4 times, and the rest of the movie has this very calm palette that you see lots of wallpaper patterns in the background. It's all very medium toned colors except for these scenes. So it creates a kind of clash, and when you're in those opening scenes and you're trying to set the tone of your movie, I feel like that threw me off a little bit. My main problem with this movie is the soundtrack. That there were certain points where it's dead silence and then it'll suddenly pick up with the score, and the score is clearly trying to elicit a sentimental, emotional response from the audience, and it just seemed too obvious to me. And I feel like a little bit more subtlety in the orchestral score would have helped this film a lot. Figuring out a better way to integrate the astronaut footage, I wonder if it would work better to have had that if it was in the movie more than it was. Because having it be these really short vignettes and they only lasted like 20 seconds, it didn't really work for me. And for the most part, the film was okay. That I didn't walk away from it thinking that this is one of the best things I've seen all year. It's not even one of the best things I've seen this month. I didn't feel like it completely wasted my time. However, I will say that I saw 2 movies yesterday, and the other one was The Purge, the Purge sequel, Purge Anarchy, which is not a horror movie. First off, it's marketed that way, but it is not. And second, that's the one I went away liking more. I like that movie more than I like this one. And this one is usually the kind of tone that I would go for way more. I'm not a campy action movie person. I like these kind of calm, indie thoughts on reflecting on life. There are a lot of elements in this movie that should have spoken to me, but they didn't. And I feel like a lot of that comes down to the sound. It was the soundtrack. A lot of the soundtrack, it's not a bad soundtrack in terms of the music. It just never seemed to quite fit with the scenes that they were showing. It's like you had good music and beautiful scenes that they really didn't skimp on the cinematography, that this movie would have worked, that it worked better as moving pictures than it did as a film. And so I can't knock the soundtrack if it's an isolated. I can't knock the pictures if they're on their own. The story did not marry them appropriately. And it's a shame because there would be some material here that could really have worked, and it just doesn't quite coalesce, and I just had an excuse to use that word. But that is a lot of the problem that I had with this film. They had very good elements, and I don't feel like they connected quite the way that they were supposed to. The performances were good. I really liked the little girl, whoever she was, Mandy Patinkin. I just started watching Homeland this year, so seeing him was really fun for me in that respect. That I hadn't really seen him in very many films, so I feel like that was a good casting choice. No one in the cast really annoyed me. The cameo was pretty fun. The guy, I'm forgetting his name, who plays Sheldon Cooper on Big Bang, he was in this for a while. His appearances were cute. That he actually played a decent role in the character development, and that part of the movie didn't bother me at all. It was basically the plotline that Mandy Patinkin is in. The cancer plotline was very sudden, and while it was the core of the movie in its essence, that it just felt that it was too emotionally manipulative, I've seen it before. He's dying throughout the course of the movie, so it's natural. So it's a natural progression of what happens with his character, and that natural progression doesn't really bring anything new to the table. And in a way, that's kind of how life can work. But when you go to the movie, you want to see a film, especially a film like this, which has that kind of the indie tone where you expect subversions. To not subvert something is in itself a subversion to an extent, but it doesn't really make you think as much as it should. That I should not have walked out of the movie theater yesterday after seeing 2 films in a row and had more to say about The Purge than I did about this film. And so that's the problem with it. That there are some really strong points to this. I haven't seen Garden State, so I don't know if the tone matched to a degree, or if you like that movie, you would like this one. It was not offensive in any way, so if you know someone who would be interested in a movie like this, it's not something that I would say is a waste of time. It was okay. It's just when it's not the best example of this kind of genre, and when you're looking at a film like this, it should aspire to be something a little bit more than it turned out to be, and I put that on mostly sound and editing. And it makes me look back on that Kickstarter campaign with a little bit of hesitance, because I really do wonder what this movie would have turned out to be if the final cut had been left with somebody else. It could have been better, it could have been worse. I have no way of knowing, and those kinds of futures are barely worth pondering. But in an instance like this, when it was funded on what was almost like a fluke flash in the pan, just immediately following Veronica Mars, and you haven't seen as many campaigns, at least be publicized, taking advantage of Kickstarter since. So it's a very isolated phenomenon, and it really does raise that what if. But anyway, those are my general thoughts on this movie. Side note, Purge Anarchy was a lot of fun. That was not a good movie either, but it was like, that was the kind of entertaining bad good. That was the good, bad, so bad it's good kind of good. And this was to put in TV tropes, this was so okay it's average. That it had an average color palette, it had an average score, it had an average number of pretty pictures, and an average amount of acting prowess throughout the cast. So, I mean, Zach Braff, you're cool. I'm sorry that I'm giving a mediocre review to something, but you can't like everything. And again, I feel like I would have liked this a lot more if I wasn't, unfortunately for this movie, but fortunately for me, comparing it to Boyhood. So, which did have a similar editing problem, but stood above a lot better than this one did. And so that's around what I have to think, and I'm still going to be haunted by this movie for at least a week on my Photo Bucket account because they're doing a website takeover promotional there, and every single time I try to upload a video, the preview for this movie keeps popping up. I'm like, I've already seen it, go away, but most people haven't. So that's my take on it. If someone else you know really wants to see it, go ahead. It's not going to be a waste of your time. You will not be wishing that you weren't here, probably. I'm so sorry that movie had a title which is so easy to warp. Bye.